Have you ever stood within the cold, hallowed silence of an ancient cathedral and felt a presence that was not entirely holy? Have you listened to the echoes that linger in the vaulted nave and wondered if they were merely the memory of forgotten hymns or something else entirely? The reverberation of an unanswered prayer, or a warning left to petrify in the stone. There are places across the old world, in chapels clinging to desolate cliffsides and crypts buried beneath the clamor of modern cities, where the line between the sacred and the profane has worn perilously thin. Here, faith and fear have become intertwined, and the monuments built to inspire divine contemplation have instead become vessels of a profound and unsettling mystery. These are not tales spun for the idle amusement of an evening. They are the collective nightmares that reveal profound truths about our mortal condition. The central thesis we shall explore is that folklore, particularly in its darkest manifestations, is not mere fiction. It is ancestral memory, a form of truth etched into the very soil, carved into the unblinking eyes of stone saints, and whispered in the chilling vacuum left by relics that have inexplicably vanished from their consecrated tombs. These legends speak of miracles that soured, of divine tears that turned from sorrow to omen, and of holy guardians who abandoned their posts, or perhaps never truly found peace in them. They are stories of a faith so potent it could animate the inanimate, and of a human frailty so profound it could corrupt the divine. I am your guide on this excursion into the shadowed corners of belief. It is my purpose to navigate these treacherous narratives, to hold a lantern to the inscriptions of dread that time has not managed to erase. Our journey will not be one of comfort, but of understanding. We shall venture together into a realm where the laws of our mundane world bend and break under the weight of belief, where marble weeps and sealed sepulchres lie inexplicably empty. Consider this, then, not a simple viewing, but a plunge into the deep, cold waters of collective memory. We are not merely recounting stories. We are undertaking an intellectual and spiritual excavation. We seek the roots of these terrors, the psychological and sociological soil in which they grew, and the eternal human anxieties they continue to nourish. This is a journey for those who understand that the most resonant horrors are not those of fiction, but those that carry the faint, chilling perfume of truth. In our exploration this evening, we shall examine 4 such legends, for instances where the sacred has become strange and the holy has become haunted. We will travel from the brackish fens of Old England to the sun-scorched plains of Castile, from the marble quarries of Renaissance Italy to the silent, brooding peaks of the Carpathian Mountains. Each legend offers a unique window into the human soul, reflecting our fears of nature's wrath, the inescapability of guilt, the poison of hubris, and the terrifying abyss of a world abandoned by grace. These are not tales for children's entertainment. They're the enduring testaments of communities grappling with forces that lie just beyond the veil of comprehension, forces that sometimes answer prayers in the most terrifying of ways. If you, like me, feel an inexorable pull toward the darkness, not for its own sake, but for the wisdom concealed within its depths, then you have found a welcome harbor. This channel is a sanctuary for the curious, for those who seek to understand the anatomy of fear and the architecture of the legends that house it. I invite you to become a permanent member of this intellectual community. Subscribe to our channel and be certain to activate the notifications so that you're never late for our descents into the fascinating and the forbidden. We are keepers of stories, guardians of the cautionary wisdom that modernity so often seeks to forget. Before we begin our formal inquiry, I pose a question to you, our fellow scholars of the shadow. As we traverse these narratives of weeping stone and absent saints, consider which of these phenomena you find more disturbing: a miracle that manifests as a dire warning, or a sacred presence that has been utterly and inexplicably withdrawn. Leave your thoughtful considerations in the comments below that we may all benefit from our shared contemplation. It is through this dialogue that we transform passive viewing into an active, collective investigation. And now, with the necessary preparations made, let our journey into the heart of these hallowed horrors begin. Our first legend takes us to the low, mist-shrouded wetlands of eastern England, to the fens of Cambridgeshire, a landscape that for centuries was a liminal space, neither fully land nor fully water. It is from this brooding, mutable environment that the legend of the sorrow of St. Giles of the Fun originates. This is not the tale of a grand, marble pontiff in a gilded basilica, but of a humble, local saint whose effigy was carved from the heartwood of a 1,000-year-old bog oak. The statue of St. Giles, housed in a small, perpetually damp chapel built on one of the few stable islets in the Great Fun, was said to weep not tears of holy blood, but droplets of brackish, peaty water, a direct secretion of the very land it was charged to protect. The weeping was a barometer of the fen's well-being, a divine sign that the delicate balance of its ecosystem was being respected by the mortal communities who depended upon its bounty. The effigy itself is described in local chronicles as being unervingly lifelike, despite its crude, almost primal carving. The bog oak from which it was hewn was black as night and hard as iron, preserving the gnarled, twisted grain of the ancient wood. St. Giles was depicted not in priestly vestments, but as a hermit clad in rough-spun cloth, his face a mask of profound, weary sorrow. His eyes, two hollowed knots in the wood, were the source of the miraculous weeping. When the fens were healthy, the seasons turned as they should, and the people lived in harmony with the wetlands, the statue's eyes remained dry. But when greed or foolishness threatened the land, a slow, viscous tear of dark water would well up in the corner of one eye, tracing a damp path down its wooden cheek. This was the first warning. Its supernatural ability was therefore not one of aggressive power, but of passive, sorrowful prophecy. Its only weakness, if one could call it that, was its complete inability to act directly. It could only bear witness and weep, a silent, grieving sentinel of the land's pain. The origin of the statue's power is tied to the saint himself. Giles, according to the legend, was a 7th-century anchorite who had fled the intrigues of a distant court to live a life of penitent solitude within the fens. He was said to have developed a profound communion with the wild landscape, understanding the language of the reeds and the moods of the water. When a hunting party led by a reckless king pursued a hind into Giles's sanctuary, the saint shielded the animal with his own body, taking an arrow in his leg that left him lame for the rest of his days. In this act, he became a martyr not for God in the abstract, but for the sanctity of the living world itself. Upon his death, his followers carved his image from the heart of the Fun, and the spirit of the land, in gratitude for his sacrifice, invested itself within the oaken effigy, granting it the ability to cry for the wounds inflicted upon it. The most famous and chilling historical account associated with the statue is that of Sir Alaric de Vere, a Norman lord granted vast swathes of the Fenlands in the late 12th century. Sir Alaric was a man of cold ambition and modern sensibilities for his time, viewing the vast, untamed wetland not as a sacred ecosystem, but as wasted potential. He saw fertile soil beneath the water and envisioned a future of orderly fields, fat livestock, and immense profit. He dismissed the local Saxon folklore surrounding the weeping saint as pagan superstition, the mutterings of a conquered and ignorant people. He declared his grand intention, to drain the Great Fun, to tame it, and to bend it to his will. His project began in the spring of 1189. The local people pleaded with him, pointing to the statue of St. Giles, from whose right eye a single, dark tear now perpetually flowed. Sir Alaric laughed. "Let your wooden man weep," he was recorded as saying. "He will have much to cry for when my canals turn his swamp into a paradise of my own making." As his army of laborers dug the first great drainage canals, the weeping intensified. The single tear became a steady trickle, and soon the other eye began to weep as well. The chapel floor became slick with a constant puddle of fen water. Still, Sir Alaric pressed on, his arrogance blinding him to the escalating omens. That autumn, The rains came with unusual ferocity. The rivers swelled, and the half-finished canals, meant to drain the landscape, instead acted as channels, funneling the floodwaters with unnatural speed and focus directly towards Sir Alaric's newly built manor house. On the night of the Feast of All Hallows, as a tempest raged outside, the statue in the chapel began to weep not tears, but to gush water from its eyes in two steady streams. The chapel itself began to flood, the water rising impossibly fast. Miles away, in his great hall, Sir Alaric and his court were celebrating their supposed triumph over nature. Suddenly, the great oaken doors burst inwards, not from the wind, but from the pressure of a solid wall of black, churning water. The flood did not rise slowly. It descended like a vengeful entity, a liquid battering ram. The last thing Sir Alaric de Vere saw was the reflection of his own horrified face in the dark, peaty wave that consumed him and his works entirely. When the waters receded weeks later, his manor was gone, buried under a new layer of silt. The Fens had reclaimed their own, and the statue of St. Giles was found, silent and dry once more, its warning having been delivered and its judgment executed. The half-dug canals remain to this day, known locally as Alaric's Folly, a permanent scar on the landscape and a testament to the legend. In this legend, the weeping statue of St. Giles serves as a powerful environmental metaphor. It is the personification of a sentient landscape, a genius loci that experiences pain and expresses grief. The statue is not an intermediary for a distant, celestial deity, but a direct conduit for the life force of the earth itself. Its tears are the literal water table, its sorrow the ecological strain of a damaged system. Sir Alaric represents the hubris of a purely extractive and utilitarian worldview, one that sees nature as a resource to be conquered rather than a living system to be respected. The narrative thus becomes a profound cautionary tale about the consequences of ignoring the intrinsic value and power of the natural world. The miracle of the weeping is a form of ecological biofeedback, and the final flood is not a divine punishment in the traditional sense, but a natural, albeit supernaturally focused, consequence, the immune response of a wounded planet. Today, the Fens are largely drained, a shadow of their former wildness, yet the legend persists. The chapel of St. Giles is gone, lost to the dissolution of the monasteries, but locals in the region still speak of a palpable sadness that hangs over certain parts of the reclaimed land, especially on misty autumn nights. There are stories of walkers becoming inexplicably lost, of compasses spinning wildly, and of hearing a faint, inconsolable weeping on the wind, carried from a chapel that no longer exists. The legend has adapted, becoming a metaphor for ecological loss and climate grief. The weeping of a saint is no longer a warning of a future catastrophe, but a lament for a paradise that has already been lost, a sorrowful echo in a tamed but haunted landscape. It reminds us that even when we think we have conquered nature, its memory, its sorrow, and its power remain buried just beneath the surface of our cultivated world. The true horror of St. Giles is not the vengeful flood, but the quiet, persistent sorrow that follows, the weeping that we can no longer see, but can still, if we listen closely, feel in the very bones of the earth. We now journey south, leaving the damp mists of England for the arid, sun-bleached plateaus of Castile and Spain, a land forged in the crucible of fervent, militant faith. Here, our focus shifts from a weeping statue to a vanished saint, from a sorrowful guardian of nature to an absent arbiter of human guilt. We confront the legend of the Hollow Confessor of Castile, a tale centered around the empty sarcophagus of Saint Dominic the Severe, a 15th-century Dominican friar, an inquisitor so renowned for his unyielding piety and his terrifying ability to perceive the hidden sins of others that he was canonized with unprecedented speed. His tomb, located in a side chapel of the great Cathedral of Salamanca, was for centuries a site of pilgrimage. But in the early 18th century, during a routine inspection, the sealed marble sarcophagus was opened and found to be utterly empty. There was no sign of theft or desecration. The seals were intact. The saint's body had simply ceased to be there. The phenomenon was not one of weeping, but of profound and unnerving absence. The vanished saint left a vacuum, and into this vacuum rushed a chilling new form of supernatural manifestation. Saint Dominic was no longer a holy relic to be venerated, but a spectral presence, an unseen and inescapable judge. His physical form was gone, but his function, his terrifying charism, was said to have dispersed into the very architecture of the cathedral, with a particular affinity for the dark, enclosed spaces of the confessionals. He became a spirit of absolute moral scrutiny. His power was not to perform miracles of healing, but of horrifying revelation. It was said that if a penitent entered a confessional with a heart full of deceit, or a priest sat to hear confession with a soul stained by hypocrisy, they might find themselves confessing not to a mortal man, but to the spectral presence of Dominic the Severe, who would force them to confront the sins they thought most cleverly concealed. His weakness was his inability to offer absolution. He was a force of pure judgment, a divine auditor who could only reveal the truth, never forgive it. The origin of this haunting is deeply rooted in the psychology of the man himself. Dominic, in life, had been consumed by the concept of sin as a spiritual disease that must be ruthlessly excised. His hagiographies describe him as a man who prayed so intensely that he would levitate, yet who could look at a nobleman and describe, in precise detail, a secret affair conducted years before. He was feared more than he was loved. His vanishing was interpreted by the mystically inclined not as an ascension into heaven, but as a refusal to rest while sin still existed in the world. His body disappeared because his work was not finished. He had transcended the limitations of flesh to become a pure, disembodied instrument of conscience, forever bound to the places where sins are named and judged. His tomb became hollow, so that he could inhabit the hollow spaces within the souls of the guilty. A particularly harrowing account, drawn from the private diaries of a cathedral official dated 1788, illustrates the terror of the hollow confessor. It concerns a young, ambitious priest named Father Lorenzo, a man known for his eloquent sermons on the evils of vanity and his scrupulous public piety. In private, however, Lorenzo was consumed by intellectual pride and a secret, burning jealousy of his superiors. He regarded the legend of the hollow confessor as a peasant superstition, a tool to frighten the credulous. One winter evening, he took the place of an elderly, ailing priest in a confessional. The cathedral was nearly empty, the air thick with the scent of cold stone and old incense. A figure, shrouded in a dark cloak, entered the penitent's side of the booth. Lorenzo began to write, but the voice that answered him was strange, a dry, rustling whisper that seemed to come from all directions at once. The penitent did not confess to common sins of theft or lust. Instead, the whispering voice began to recount, with chilling accuracy, the secret thoughts of Father Lorenzo himself. It spoke of his envy toward the bishop, his silent mockery of the elderly priest he had replaced, his pride in his own intellect that bordered on blasphemy. Lorenzo, frozen in the darkness, felt a cold dread seep into his very marrow. He tried to interrupt, to dismiss the man as a madman, but the voice grew stronger. "You preach against vanity, son of pride," the whisper hissed, "yet you polish your own soul in the mirror of your sermons and call it virtue. You condemn the sins of the flesh, yet your soul is riddled with a far deeper corruption." The voice then began to reveal a sin Lorenzo had committed in his youth, a cruel betrayal of a childhood friend, a secret he believed had died with the past. He had confessed it once, formally, but had never truly felt the weight of its guilt. Now, in the suffocating darkness, every detail was laid bare by the unseen confessor. The spectral penitent was confessing Lorenzo's own sins back to him. With a final, sibilant whisper, the voice said, "Your penance is to know that you are known." Utterly, Lorenzo screamed and burst out of the confessional, his face a mask of primal terror. He was found hours later, wandering the cloisters, babbling incoherently. He spent the rest of his short life in a monastic asylum, unable to bear the gaze of any other person, forever haunted by the knowledge of his own soul's utter transparency. The legend of the Hollow Confessor is a masterful psychological allegory. The vanished saint represents the internalization of a punitive superego, the inescapable voice of conscience that resides within us all. In a culture as steeped in the concepts of sin and confession as Counter-Reformation Spain, this narrative gives external form to an internal terror, the fear that our innermost thoughts are not private, that a divine, unblinking eye is perpetually upon us, scrutinizing our every motive. Father Lorenzo's ordeal is a cautionary tale against hypocrisy, but it is more deeply a story about the psychological horror of self-knowledge when it is stripped of grace. Dominic the Severe does not offer forgiveness. He offers only perfect, horrifying clarity. He is the part of the psyche that cannot be deceived, the ultimate Freudian ID made manifest as a divine judge. The empty tomb is a potent symbol. The authority of judgment is no longer contained within a physical relic, but has become a pervasive, atmospheric principle. In the modern era, the legend of the Hollow Confessor has, perhaps predictably, faded from common parlance, but its psychological resonance endures. The Cathedral of Salamanca still stands, and while the confessional booths are now largely frequented by tourists, a certain unease is said to linger around the chapel of St. Dominic. The story is sometimes invoked not by priests, but by psychologists and philosophers as a metaphor for the anxieties of the digital age. In a world of social media, constant surveillance, and the erosion of privacy, we are all, in a sense, confessing to a hollow, unseen judge. Our secret thoughts, our hypocrisies, our past mistakes are all recorded, archived, and potentially subject to exposure and judgment at any moment. The terror of Father Lorenzo, the horror of being utterly known, has become a secular, technological reality. The Hollow Confessor has merely changed his form, from a spectral inquisitor in a dark booth to the silent, all-seeing network that now constitutes the conscience of our world. The tomb is still empty, and the judgment is more pervasive than ever. We now travel to the heart of the Italian Renaissance, to the sun-drenched hills of Tuscany and the famed marble quarries of Carrara. Here, the boundary between divine art and mortal arrogance becomes the stage for our third legend, the Marble Martyr of Carrara. This tale concerns a statue of Saint Lucia, a virgin martyr, carved in the late 14th century from a single, flawless block of white Carrara marble. It was housed in a small, remote convent and became renowned for a singular, terrifying miracle. On the anniversary of the saint's martyrdom, the statue would weep thick, viscous tears of what appeared to be human blood. Pilgrims flocked to witness the phenomenon, and the convent grew wealthy and famous from their offerings. The statue was seen as a direct conduit to the divine, its bloody tears a perpetual reminder of the saint's sacrifice and a symbol of God's sorrow for the sins of the world. The statue itself was described as a work of sublime, almost painful beauty. The anonymous sculptor had captured Saint Lucia at the moment of her martyrdom, not in agony, but in a state of transcendent grace, her eyes turned toward heaven. The miracle of the stigmata, the bloody tears, was its primary supernatural manifestation. Unlike the sorrowful warning of St. Giles or the judgmental presence of Dominic, the marble martyr's power was one of awe and visceral shock, a display of divine suffering meant to inspire piety through horror and pity. However, the legend took a dark turn. In the mid-16th century, the weeping ceased. Upon closer inspection, the priests discovered that the statue's exquisitely carved eyes were gone, leaving only two smooth, hollow sockets. It was as if the statue had been blinded. Simultaneously, the convent's fortunes began to fail, and the quarry from which the original marble block had been excavated became known as a place of ill omen, plagued by landslides and fatal accidents. The weeping saint had become a blind and hollowed effigy. The origin of this desecration is not attributed to common vandals, but to a sin of artistic pride. The legend states that the statue's divine animation was a gift, a perfect union of human artistry and divine grace. The saint's spirit, pleased with the beautiful form created for her, inhabited the marble as a vessel. The blinding of the statue and the subsequent curse were a direct result of human hubris attempting to dissect, possess, and ultimately commodify that sacred union. The miracle was not a thing to be understood or replicated. It was to be venerated. When that boundary was crossed, grace was withdrawn, leaving behind only an empty shell and a cursed source. The central narrative of this transformation revolves around a brilliant but arrogant Florentine sculptor named Niccolò Bellini, who lived in the early 1500s. Bellini was a man of the High Renaissance, a peer of the great masters, but he was consumed by a desire not merely to equal them, but to surpass the very concept of divinely inspired art. He became obsessed with the weeping martyr of Carrara, viewing it not with piety, but with professional jealousy. He saw the miracle of the bloody tears as the ultimate artistic effect, and he convinced himself that if he could understand its source, he could replicate it, thereby proving that human genius was equal to, or even greater than, the power of God. He scoffed at the idea of a spirit inhabiting the stone, believing there to be a hidden property within the marble itself, a geological flaw, or a unique mineral inclusion that, when combined with atmospheric changes, produced the bloody tears. Under the guise of a devout pilgrimage, Bellini traveled to the convent. One night, he broke into the chapel. He did not seek to destroy the statue, but to steal its secret. With a set of finely honed chisels, he performed a horrifyingly delicate act of violation. He did not smash the statue's eyes, but carefully, surgically excavated them, hoping to find the source of the bleeding within the stone's core. He found nothing but pure, unblemished marble. In a fit of frustrated rage, he took the 2 marble eyeballs and a handful of dust from the desecrated sockets and fled into the night. Back in his Florentine studio, he ground the stolen marble into a fine powder, which he mixed into the clay for his new masterpiece, a statue of Prometheus, the titan who stole fire from the gods. He believed that by incorporating this sacred material, he would infuse his own creation with a life and power that would dwarf the fame of the weeping martyr. His statue of Prometheus was indeed a masterpiece of technical skill, a vision of defiant, muscular agony. But on the night he completed it, a strange transformation occurred. The marble, which should have been cold and white, began to glow with a faint, internal red light. The statue's limbs began to twitch and move, not with the grace of life, but with the grinding, terrible sound of stone grating on stone. Bellini watched in horror as his creation tore itself from its pedestal. It was not a living being, but a golem, a monstrous automaton of stone animated by a profaned and vengeful spirit. The statue's eyes, where Bellini had lavished his greatest skill, were hollow sockets, just like the violated martyr he had desecrated. The creature turned its blind face toward its creator, and its purpose was clear. It was an embodiment of Bellini's own soulless ambition, an artistic triumph devoid of grace. The sculptor's fate is not recorded in detail, only that his studio was found destroyed, the Prometheus statue shattered into 1,000 pieces, and Bellini himself was discovered crushed beneath a great block of raw marble, his hands, the instruments of his hubris, broken beyond recognition. The stolen eyes of St. Lucia were never found. The analytical interpretation of the marble martyr's legend is a profound cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris, particularly the arrogance of reducing the sacred to the mechanical. Niccolò Bellini represents a worldview that seeks to demystify, to own, and to control phenomena that should inspire awe and humility. His act of carving out the statue's eyes is deeply symbolic. It is a literal attempt to see the secret of the divine, and in doing so, he blinds it, destroying the very miracle he sought to understand. The resulting curse is not merely a punishment, but a perfect reflection of his crime. He sought to create life from stolen grace, and instead created a soulless, destructive automaton. The legend serves as a powerful critique of a purely materialistic or rationalist approach to matters of faith and art. It argues that some things lose their essence the moment they are dissected. The beauty and power of the weeping statue lay in the mystery of its divine animation. When that mystery was violated, the power did not vanish but turned malignant. In our contemporary world, the story of the marble martyr resonates with our anxieties about genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and the relentless commodification of art and culture. We, like Bellini, are often driven by a Promethean desire to unlock and control the fundamental secrets of life and consciousness. This legend warns us of the potential consequences of such ambition when it is not tempered by wisdom and reverence. It asks a chilling question. In our quest to replicate the miracle of life or consciousness, are we, like Bellini, simply mixing the dust of profaned wonders into our creations? And what kind of blind, hollow-eyed golems might we unleash upon the world as a result? The hollowed eyes of Saint Lucia serve as an eternal symbol of a grace that has been withdrawn in the face of sacrilege, a haunting reminder that to lose our capacity for awe is to become blind ourselves. For our final legend, we venture eastward into the mist-wreathed peaks and ancient forests of the Carpathian Mountains in Romania, a land where folklore breathes in the very air and the veil between worlds has always been thin. Here we encounter the chilling tale of the silent shepherd of the Carpathians, a story that revolves around a vanished relic and a statue that weaponizes not sorrow or judgment, but an absolute and terrifying void. In a remote, isolated Orthodox monastery, perched on a mountain crag, stood a wooden statue of Saint Procopius the Shepherd, a local hermit saint who was said to have protected the flocks and people of the mountains from both wolves and darker, more ancient things. The statue was carved from a lightning-struck pine and was considered the monastery's holiest treasure, not because of the effigy itself, but because it held the saint's actual shepherd's crook, a simple staff of polished birchwood. The presence of this relic was believed to create a zone of profound peace and spiritual tranquility around the monastery. The turning point in the legend occurred sometime in the early 20th century. The reasons are lost to time. Perhaps a thief, perhaps a rival monastery, perhaps a darker power. The shepherd's crook vanished from the statue's grasp. The relic was gone. From that day forward, the statue of Saint Procopius, which had once radiated peace, began to emit its antithesis. It did not weep, nor did it move. Instead, it projected an aura of profound, unnatural silence. This was not the mere absence of sound. It was an active, oppressive nullity that swallowed noise and thought alike. Those who stood before it found that the prayers on their lips dissolved into nothingness. The sound of their own heartbeat would become deafening in their ears for a moment, and then it too would fade, leaving them in a terrifying sensory vacuum. Prolonged exposure was said to lead to madness, as the mind, deprived of all external stimuli and even the comfort of its own internal monologue, would turn inward and collapse upon itself. The silent shepherd's power was the terror of absolute isolation, a spiritual black hole from which no prayer could escape. The origin of this malevolent silence is interpreted as a manifestation of divine absence. Saint Procopius was a guardian, a shepherd. His crook was the instrument and symbol of his protective power. With the relic stolen, the saint's protective presence was not merely gone, it was inverted. The statue, now an empty vessel, did not become inert, but instead began to radiate the terrifying reality of a world without divine connection, a world where prayers are not unheard, but are actively, supernaturally canceled. It became a monument to the void, a terrifying demonstration of what it means for heaven to be not just distant, but utterly, impenetrably silent. The shepherd had lost his staff, and his flock was left to the wolves of the void. The most potent historical vignette associated with this legend is set during the darkest days of Romania's communist regime in the 1950s, a period of brutal state-enforced atheism. A zealous party official, a commissar named Vasile, was dispatched to the remote Carpathia monastery with a small contingent of soldiers. His orders were to liquidate the monastic community, confiscate all religious artifacts for the state, and convert the ancient building into a sanatorium for loyal party members. Vasile was a man who prided himself on his cold, unyielding materialism. He saw religion as a poison and its symbols as idols to be smashed. Upon arriving, he found the monastery inhabited by only a handful of ancient, defiant monks. The abbot warned him specifically about the statue of Saint Procopius in the main chapel, pleading with him not to disturb it. "It is not the saint you should fear, commissar," the old man whispered, "but his silence." Vasile laughed, striking the abbot across the face. He strode into the chapel, his boots echoing loudly on the stone floor. He stood before the wooden shepherd, noting the empty hand where the crook should have been. "So, this is the great protector?" he boomed, his voice unnaturally loud in the small space. "A wooden doll. He cannot even hold onto his own walking stick. He will not protect you now." He ordered his men to strip the chapel of its icons and its gold. As the soldiers began their work of desecration, a change occurred in the atmosphere. It began subtly. The clatter of a dropped silver chalice seemed muffled, its echo swallowed before it could bloom. The soldiers' gruff voices became flat, without resonance. Vasile, standing before the statue, felt a strange pressure in his ears. He tried to shout another order, but the words felt thick and heavy in his mouth, the sound dying just inches from his lips. Within minutes, the silence was absolute. It was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered all vibration. The soldiers stopped their looting, looking around in confusion and growing panic. They could see their comrades' mouths moving, but no sound emerged. They were sealed in individual bubbles of perfect quiet. The terror that followed was not of a visible monster, but of an internal one. Alone in the vacuum, each man was left with nothing but the screaming of his own conscience. The thuggish soldier who had murdered partisans recalled their faces with perfect clarity. The corrupt quartermaster remembered the starving villagers from whom he had stolen grain. Commissar Vasile himself was confronted by the faces of the priests he had tortured and the families he had sent to labor camps. Their silent accusations were the only sound left in the universe. When a relief party arrived days later, they found a scene of madness. The chapel was in disarray, its treasures scattered. The soldiers were either catatonic in corners, staring at nothing, or had taken their own lives. Commissar Vasile was found directly in front of the statue of Saint Procopius. He was alive, but his eyes were wide with a horror that would never leave them. He was completely, irreversibly deaf, but the doctor said it was not a physical ailment. His brain had simply ceased to process the concept of sound, having been overwhelmed by the memory of its perfect, horrifying absence. The analytical power of the Silent Shepherd legend lies in its exploration of faith, meaning, and the terror of cosmic indifference. The statue is a potent symbol for a post-religious or nihilistic worldview. In an age of faith, the saint and his relic provided comfort, protection, and a sense of connection to a benevolent cosmic order. With the relic gone, the statue becomes a monument to the loss of that connection. The silence it projects is the silence of an empty universe, a cosmos in which human pleas for meaning and salvation go unanswered because there is simply nothing there to hear them. The ordeal of Commissar Vasile and his men is particularly insightful. They, who violently enforced a philosophy of meaninglessness upon others, are ultimately destroyed by a perfect, supernatural dose of that very same meaninglessness. They are not struck down by a thunderbolt from a vengeful god, but are instead consumed by the very void they sought to create. It is a terrifyingly subtle form of divine justice. The legend suggests that the most profound horror is not damnation in a fiery hell, but the realization that our moral and spiritual lives are playing out in an empty, silent theater. In the 21st century, the legend of the silent shepherd speaks to a distinctly modern form of existential dread. In a world saturated with noise, information, and constant communication, the idea of a true, deep silence is both alluring and terrifying. The legend serves as a metaphor for the spiritual alienation that can occur even amidst this hyperconnectivity. We can be surrounded by the noise of the world, yet feel utterly, profoundly alone, our own prayers, our search for meaning and purpose, swallowed by the static. The silent shepherd reminds us that the withdrawal of the sacred is not a peaceful, quiet affair. It is an active, aggressive emptiness, a silence that does not soothe but devours. It is the ultimate horror, not the presence of a demon, but the absolute and final absence of a god. Our journey through these shadowed landscapes of faith and fear now draws to its close. We have stood in the midst of the English fens and felt the sorrow of St. Giles. We have entered the confessional in Castile and faced the terrifying scrutiny of the hollow confessor. We have witnessed the sacrilege committed against the marble martyr of Carrara and seen the monstrous reflection of hubris. And finally, we have listened to the profound and maddening void left by the silent shepherd of the Carpathians. Each legend, a unique shard from the broken mirror of human belief, reflects a different facet of our eternal anxieties. What wisdom, then, have we gleaned from these tales of weeping stone and vanished saints? What unified truth distills from these disparate horrors? We have seen that these legends function as a form of collective, cultural psychoanalysis. They are not merely stories. They are diagnostic tools for the soul of a people. The sorrow of St. Giles reveals a deep-seated anxiety about our relationship with the natural world, a fear that our exploitation of the earth will be met with a sorrowful but implacable retribution. The hollow confessor embodies the terror of guilt in a society built upon confession and moral absolutism, the fear that even our most private thoughts are subject to an infallible judgment. The marble martyr serves as a timeless warning against the sin of pride, especially the intellectual and artistic arrogance that seeks to dissect and possess the sacred, thereby destroying it. And the silent shepherd confronts us with the most modern of terrors, the existential dread of a silent, indifferent cosmos, the fear that our search for meaning is ultimately met with nothing but an all-consuming void. These are the truths encoded within the folklore. The weeping statues are not random miracles. They are manifestations of grief, grief for a wounded earth, grief for human sin. The vanished saints are not tales of simple theft. They represent the withdrawal of grace, the terror of judgment without mercy, and the horrifying silence that answers a prayer in a faithless age. Together, they paint a portrait of humanity's precarious position between the sacred and the profane, constantly striving for connection with the divine, yet perpetually undermining it with our greed, our guilt, our hubris, and our doubt. They teach us that the supernatural is often a mirror, reflecting the darkest parts of our own nature back at us in monstrous, undeniable forms. The true horror is not that these entities exist, but that we, through our actions and our failings, are the ones who call them into being. By subscribing to this channel, you do more than simply watch videos. You become a participant in a vital tradition, the tradition of keeping and interpreting the stories that tell us who we are. You become a guardian of the complex wisdom embedded in our darkest tales. I urge you, therefore, to formalize your place in this community. Subscribe to our channel so you may continue to join us on these intellectual journeys. Share these stories with those who you believe possess the fortitude and curiosity to appreciate them. And continue the conversation in the comments, for it is in the shared act of interpretation that these legends truly come alive. The world is old, and it has not yet given up all of its secrets. New legends are being born even now, in the digital ether and the concrete canyons of our modern world. While the old ones continue to evolve, to haunt us in new and unexpected ways. Rest assured that as they surface, I shall be here, a faithful guide to navigate their murky depths with you. For now, may your nights be free from the silence of the void, and your conscience clear before any unseen confessor. The best monsters, after all, are always the ones that show us something true about ourselves. Until we next descend into the shadows together, remain vigilant, remain curious, and listen for the whispers in the stone.